Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In March of 1975, 16-year-old Sharron Prior left her Montreal home to walk 3 blocks to a local pizza parlor, a path she'd taken countless times before. But on this chilly spring evening, she would never arrive at her destination. What followed was one of Canada's most haunting cold cases, a 48-year mystery that would finally be solved through the persistence of a grieving mother and the power of modern DNA technology. Tonight, we'll explore how a teenager's short walk for pizza became a decades-long search for justice, and how a killer who thought he'd taken his secrets to the grave was finally identified. Let's begin. On a chilly spring evening in 1975, the quiet Montreal suburb of Pointe-Saint-Charles was about to be forever changed. 16-year-old Sharron Prior stepped out of her family's modest home on Willibroad Avenue, telling her mother Yvonne that she'd be back soon. It was Saturday, March 29th, and Sharron was heading to Marina's Pizza, a popular local restaurant just 3 blocks away, where she planned to meet her friends. The short walk was one she'd made countless times before in this tight-knit, working-class neighborhood. Sharron was wearing blue jeans, a navy blue sweater, and her beloved denim jacket with the familiar red maple leaf patch on the back. Her long brown hair fell past her shoulders, and she carried a small amount of money for pizza. It was around 7:15 p.m. when she left home, and the streets were still busy with weekend activity. Nobody could have known that this would be the last time Sharron's family would see her alive. When Sharron failed to return home by her 11 p.m. curfew, her mother became increasingly worried. This was completely out of character for Sharron, who was known for being responsible and punctual. Her friends at Marina's Pizza confirmed that she never arrived that evening. By midnight, Yvonne Prior had contacted the Montreal Police Department, but they suggested waiting a bit longer, suggesting that perhaps Sharron was just running late or had lost track of time. As the hours ticked by with no word from Sharron, the community of Pointe-Saint-Charles mobilized. Local residents, many of whom had known Sharron since she was a little girl, joined in the search. They combed the streets, alleyways, and parks of the neighborhood. Posters with Sharron's photograph were quickly printed and distributed throughout the area. The image showed a pretty teenager with a bright smile and kind eyes, the kind of girl who was known for babysitting neighborhood children and helping elderly residents with their groceries. The police finally launched a formal investigation on Sunday morning, but the initial crucial hours had already been lost. Witnesses came forward reporting that they had seen Sharron walking alone on Willibroad Avenue on Saturday evening, heading in the direction of Marina's Pizza. One witness reported seeing a young woman matching Sharron's description appearing distressed near the corner of Wellington Street, but this sighting was never definitively confirmed. The investigation took a tragic turn on Tuesday, April 1st, 1975, when 3 days after her disappearance, Sharron's body was discovered in a field in Longueuil, across the St. Lawrence River from Montreal. The location was near McKayville, behind the Christ the King Church on Terrace Churchill. 2 young boys playing in the area made the horrific discovery and immediately alerted adults. The crime scene told a story of unimaginable violence. Sharron had been brutally beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. Her clothing was torn and scattered around her body. The medical examiner would later determine that she had died from a combination of strangulation and exposure to the harsh elements. Evidence suggested she had been alive for some time after being abandoned in the field. The investigation revealed that Sharron had likely been abducted shortly after leaving her home, possibly forced into a vehicle. Tire tracks were found at the Longueuil crime scene, along with footprints and other physical evidence that was carefully collected by investigators. The police believed that the perpetrator was familiar with the area where Sharron's body was found, as it was a relatively secluded location that would have been difficult to find for someone not local to the region. the community was devastated. Pointe-Saint-Charles, a neighborhood where everyone knew each other and children played freely in the streets, was transformed overnight. Parents began accompanying their children everywhere, and the carefree atmosphere that had characterized the area was replaced by fear and suspicion. The Montreal police conducted hundreds of interviews in the weeks following Sharron's murder. They spoke to local residents, known sex offenders in the area, and anyone who might have seen something suspicious that Saturday night. Several potential suspects were identified and questioned, but none of them could be definitively linked to the crime. The investigation was hampered by the technological limitations of the time. DNA testing didn't exist in 1975, and while physical evidence was collected from the crime scene and Sharron's body, the analytical tools available to investigators were primitive by today's standards. Still, the evidence was carefully preserved, a decision that would prove crucial in the decades to come. Sharron's mother, Sharron Prior, refused to let her daughter's case be forgotten. She kept in regular contact with the police, followed up on leads herself, and spoke to the media whenever possible to keep Sharron's story in the public eye. The case deeply affected the investigators who worked on it, many of whom would later say that Sharron's murder was one of the most haunting cases of their careers. The investigation revealed more about Sharron's life and the kind of person she was. She was a student at Verdun Catholic High School, where she was well liked by both teachers and fellow students. She had recently started working part-time at a local department store, saving money for her future. Friends described her as fun-loving but sensible, someone who enjoyed life but was also careful and aware of her surroundings. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case remained unsolved. But unlike many cold cases that gradually fade from public consciousness, Sharron Prior's murder continued to resonate within the community. The location where her body was found became an unofficial memorial site, with local residents occasionally leaving flowers in her memory. The investigation would take many turns over the years, with various task forces reviewing the evidence and following up on new leads as they emerged. The case file grew thick with witness statements, forensic reports, and investigative notes. Each new detective who looked at the case brought fresh eyes and different perspectives, but the fundamental question remained. Who had taken Sharron Prior's life that spring evening in 1975? What made the case particularly frustrating for investigators was the likelihood that the killer was familiar with both Pointe-Saint-Charles and the Longueuil area. The specific location where Sharron's body was found suggested local knowledge, leading investigators to believe that the perpetrator either lived in or had strong connections to both communities. This theory would become increasingly important as the investigation continued over the decades. As the investigation entered the 1980s, advances in forensic science offered new hope for solving Sharron's case. The Montreal Police Department's Cold Case Unit regularly revisited the evidence, applying new investigative techniques as they became available. The physical evidence collected from the crime scene, including DNA samples that had been carefully preserved, would prove invaluable as technology progressed. In 1985, 10 years after Sharron's murder, investigators made a crucial discovery while reviewing old witness statements. Several people had reported seeing a light-colored vehicle, possibly a Chevrolet, in the area around the time of Sharron's disappearance. The driver had been described as a man in his 20s or early 30s. While this lead was pursued extensively, including interviews with every registered owner of similar vehicles in the region, it ultimately led to another dead end. The 1990s brought the advent of DNA testing, and Sharron's case was among the first cold cases in Quebec to undergo this new form of analysis. The evidence collected from her body and clothing revealed a complete male DNA profile. This profile was entered into various databases, but no matches were found at the time. However, The existence of this DNA profile meant that if the perpetrator was ever arrested for another crime, there was a possibility of a match. Yvonne Prior continued her relentless pursuit of justice for her daughter. She became an advocate for victims' rights and worked closely with other families of murdered children. Every year on the anniversary of Sharron's death, she would speak to local media, ensuring that her daughter's story remained in the public consciousness. "Someone knows something," she would often say. "Someone has carried this secret for too long." In 2005, 30 years after Sharron's murder, the Montreal Police Department established a specialized cold case unit. Detective Sergeant John McGrath, who had been haunted by Sharron's case since the beginning of his career, took a particular interest in re-examining the evidence. Using advanced computer modeling, the team was able to create a more detailed reconstruction of the crime scene and the likely sequence of events. The investigation revealed new details about the hours following Sharron's abduction. Based on forensic evidence and witness statements, investigators believed she had been taken to a location in Longueuil before being brought to the field where her body was found. This intermediate location was never identified, but soil samples from Sharron's clothing suggested it might have been a garage or workshop. In 2019, genetic genealogy emerged as a powerful new tool in solving cold cases. This technique, which had led to breakthroughs in numerous historical cases across North America, offered new hope for Sharron's case. The DNA profile from the crime scene was submitted for genetic genealogy analysis, allowing investigators to construct family trees of potential suspects based on genetic markers. The breakthrough finally came in early 2023. After decades of investigation, advances in DNA technology and genetic genealogy led investigators to Franklin Maywood Romine, born in 1945 in West Virginia. The DNA evidence from the crime scene was conclusively matched to Romine's profile. The man who had eluded justice for nearly half a century was finally identified. However, there would be no traditional justice for Sharron Prior. Franklin Romine had died in 1982 in Montreal, 7 years after committing the murder. The investigation revealed that he had lived in the Longueuil area at the time of Sharron's murder and had a history of violence against women. His job as a delivery driver gave him intimate knowledge of both the Pointe-Saint-Charles and Longueuil areas. The identification of Romine answered many questions that had puzzled investigators for decades. His work route regularly took him through Sharron's neighborhood, and he would have been familiar with the field where her body was found. His vehicle, a light-colored Chevrolet, matched witness descriptions from 1975. The pieces of the puzzle finally fit together, though tragically too late for any criminal prosecution. For Yvonne Prior, the identification of her daughter's killer brought mixed emotions. While there was relief in finally knowing the truth, the fact that Romine had lived freely for 7 years after the murder, dying without facing justice for his crimes, was difficult to accept. "At least now we know," she told reporters. "At least Sharron's story has an ending." The impact of Sharron's case on Canadian law enforcement was significant. It demonstrated the importance of preserving evidence properly, even in an era before DNA testing existed. The case also highlighted the value of persistent investigation and the application of new technologies to cold cases. The Montreal Police Department's handling of the physical evidence in 1975 made it possible for 21st century technology to finally solve the crime. The investigation into Romine's background revealed other possible crimes that he might have committed. Police departments across North America began reviewing unsolved cases from the 1970s that matched his pattern of violence and his known whereabouts. The possibility that Sharron was not his only victim continues to drive ongoing investigations. Continued in Next Response. The identification of Franklin Romine led investigators to delve deeper into his past, revealing a troubling pattern of behavior that had gone unnoticed for decades. Records showed that he had moved between various locations in Canada and the United States, never staying in one place for too long. This transient lifestyle, combined with the fragmented nature of law enforcement databases in the 1970s, had helped him avoid detection. Investigators discovered that Ramin had worked for several delivery companies in the Montreal area during the mid-1970s. His employment records showed that he had been working for a local company that regularly made deliveries to businesses in Pointe-Saint-Charles, including some near Marina's Pizza, where Sharron had been heading that fateful night. This information helped explain how he might have encountered Sharron and why he was familiar with the area where her body was found. The cold case unit's examination of Ramin's personal history revealed a troubled individual with a pattern of violence that began in his youth. Court records from West Virginia showed several arrests for assault in his early 20s, though most charges had been dropped or resulted in minimal sentences. His migration to Canada in the early 1970s had effectively given him a clean slate, as his American criminal record didn't follow him across the border. One of the most chilling aspects of the investigation was the discovery of Ramin's residence at the time of Sharron's murder. He had lived in an apartment just a few blocks from where her body was found in Longueuil. The apartment building still stood, and current residents were shocked to learn of its connection to such a notorious cold case. Police believed that Ramin might have brought Sharron to this location before taking her to the field where she was ultimately found. The investigation team also uncovered evidence suggesting that Ramin had been questioned during the initial investigation in 1975. His name appeared in the original case files as one of hundreds of delivery drivers interviewed by police, but without the benefit of DNA testing or modern investigative techniques, he hadn't stood out as a primary suspect. This discovery was particularly painful for the original investigators, knowing how close they had come to identifying the killer. Forensic psychologists who reviewed the case suggested that Ramin's attack on Sharron likely wasn't his first violent crime. His level of confidence in abducting a victim from a busy street and navigating to a remote location suggested previous experience with similar crimes. This led investigators to review other unsolved murders and disappearances in areas where Ramin had lived between 1965 and his death in 1982. The investigation also revealed more about Ramin's final years. He had died of natural causes in a Montreal hospital, living under his own name, never having been held accountable for Sharron's murder. Hospital records showed he had suffered from liver disease, likely related to heavy alcohol use. Former co-workers who were interviewed described him as a loner who rarely socialized with others and often exhibited strange behavior. For the Prior family, learning these details about their daughter's killer was both illuminating and devastating. The knowledge that he had lived so close to where Sharron's body was found, that he had continued his normal life while they suffered through decades of uncertainty, was particularly difficult to process. Yvonne Prior spoke about the strange feeling of finally having answers after so many years of questions. The case has since become a landmark example in Canadian forensic science, particularly in demonstrating the value of preserving evidence properly. The Montreal Police Department now uses Sharron's case as a training example for new detectives, emphasizing the importance of thorough evidence collection and preservation, even when current technology might not be able to fully analyze it. The field where Sharron's body was found has since been developed, but a small memorial garden was established nearby in her memory. Local residents maintain the garden, and it serves as both a tribute to Sharron and a reminder of the importance of community vigilance and the power of persistent investigation. The solving of Sharron's case also brought hope to other families waiting for answers about their own loved ones' unsolved murders. The Montreal Police Department saw an increase in inquiries about cold cases after Sharron's killer was identified, with many families hoping that advances in DNA technology might help solve their cases as well. Today, Sharron's case is considered a turning point in Canadian cold case investigation. The successful identification of her killer after nearly 5 decades demonstrated that no case is truly unsolvable as long as evidence is properly preserved and investigators remain dedicated to finding the truth. The case continues to influence how evidence is collected and stored, ensuring that future investigations will benefit from the lessons learned in solving Sharron's murder. The Prior family has established a scholarship in Sharron's name at her former high school, ensuring that her memory lives on in a positive way. The scholarship is awarded annually to a student who demonstrates the kind of community involvement and caring spirit that Sharron was known for. Through this, they have transformed a story of tragedy into one of hope and remembrance. As this case finally comes to a close, it serves as a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still be served. The solving of Sharron Prior's murder proves that no matter how much time has passed, the truth can eventually come to light, bringing closure to families and communities affected by such tragic events.